8 states are going dry, and almost nobody is talking about it. Right now, beneath the fields that grow a third of America's food, the largest aquifer in the United States is dying. The Ogallala Aquifer, gone. Not shrinking, not stressed, dying. And once it's empty, it is never coming back. Farmers across Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, and 5 other states are watching their wells go quiet. Wells that their grandfathers drilled. Wells that fed entire communities for 70 years. Now the pumps are running, and nothing comes up. Here is what makes this different from every drought you've ever heard about. A drought ends when the rain returns. This doesn't end. The water underneath the American breadbasket is between 10,000 and 2 million years old, and we have already pumped a quarter of it away, permanently, in just 75 years. But here's the part that should terrify you. The government has known about this for decades. They have written the reports. They have counted the dying wells. And they have done almost nothing to stop it. So what really happens to America, its food, its prices, its small towns, when the water that built the breadbasket is finally, completely gone? The Ogallala Aquifer sits beneath one of the flattest, driest, most unassuming stretches of land in America. No mountains, no rivers you would recognize. Just wind, wheat, and sky stretching from the Texas Panhandle all the way north to South Dakota. From the surface, it looks like ordinary farmland. Beneath it sits something extraordinary. It is the largest aquifer in the United States, an underground reservoir of fresh water so massive that for most of human history, people had no idea it was even there. The aquifer underlies 174,000 square miles across 8 states: Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, and South Dakota. All of them sitting on top of the same ancient body of water. All of them dependent on it in ways that most Americans have never stopped to think about. It did not form overnight. The Ogallala took approximately 6 million years to build. During that time, the Rocky Mountains were slowly eroding eastward, and the great river systems of the American interior were depositing sand, gravel, and porous sediment across what is now the high plains. Rainfall and snowmelt percolated down through that sediment for tens of thousands of generations, filling the spaces between grains of ancient rock until the underground formation became a saturated reservoir of fresh water hundreds of feet thick. By the time the last ice age ended roughly 12,000 years ago, the Ogallala held an estimated 3 billion acre-feet of water. To put that in terms that actually mean something, that is roughly equivalent to Lake Huron sitting beneath the center of the United States, one of the largest freshwater lakes on the planet. Underground, invisible, sitting beneath farms and ranches and small towns that did not yet exist. For the next 12,000 years, it stayed that way. The indigenous peoples of the High Plains drank from springs where the aquifer surfaced naturally. The native grasses that fed the great bison herds drew on shallow groundwater the aquifer fed from below. When the Spanish explorer Coronado crossed the southern High Plains in 1541, his maps labeled the landscape uninhabitable. No surface water visible for hundreds of miles. The water was there. It was just completely out of reach. The aquifer's upper surface sits on average between 50 and 300 feet below ground. For most of recorded human history, that depth was effectively infinite. You could not lift water from 300 feet underground without industrial equipment that simply did not exist yet. So the High Plains stayed empty. The grass grew. The bison ran. And 3 billion acre-feet of the cleanest fresh water in North America sat completely undisturbed beneath the surface. Then, the wells came. The first wells drilled into the Ogallala in the early 1900s were modest things. Percussion rigs adapted from Pennsylvania oil exploration punched narrow holes into the earth and pulled up a few thousand gallons per day. Enough to water a herd of cattle. Enough to sustain a single homestead through a dry summer. The aquifer was being touched, but barely. Nobody was alarmed. Nobody was counting. That changed in the 1930s. Between 1930 and 1936, the High Plains experienced the most catastrophic agricultural collapse in American history. Drought combined with decades of plow-based soil disturbance and the destruction of native grass cover turned the topsoil of 5 states into airborne dust. The storms were unlike anything the continent had seen in living memory. On April 14, 1935, a day that survivors would call Black Sunday, dust clouds rolled across the High Plains so thick and so tall that they turned afternoon into midnight. The storm carried High Plains topsoil all the way to Washington, D.C., darkening the skies above the Senate chamber itself as a soil scientist named Hugh Hammond Bennett testified about the destruction of American farmland. Bennett would later become the first chief of the Federal Soil Conservation Service. The image of his own evidence arriving through the windows while he spoke reportedly helped push Congress toward action. The federal government's response to the Dust Bowl reshaped American agriculture for the next 50 years. The Bureau of Reclamation and the Soil Conservation Service began aggressively promoting groundwater irrigation as the permanent solution to High Plains drought. The message was straightforward. The water is down there. Use it. And then, in 1948, a Nebraska farmer named Frank Zybach made that possible at a scale nobody had imagined. Working on a small piece of land near Strasburg, Colorado, Zybach designed and patented the first practical center pivot irrigation system. A long, rotating arm of pipe mounted on wheeled towers that walked itself in a slow circle around a central wellhead, spraying water across a perfectly round field. It was simple, it was scalable, and it worked. By 1970, more than 50,000 center pivots were operating across Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska. By 1990, more than 200,000. Each one drawing from a single deep well punched into the Ogallala. Each one running 10 to 15 hours per day through the growing season. Each one consuming roughly 500 gallons of water per minute at full operation. The aquifer that had sat undisturbed for 12,000 years was now being pumped at industrial scale across 200,000 wells simultaneously. Every hour, every day, season after season, it could not last. The United States Geological Survey has been publishing annual water level reports for the High Plains Aquifer System since 1978. The data is public. It is detailed. It is updated every single year. And for nearly 5 decades, it has been pointing in exactly one direction: down. Across the southern portion of the Ogallala, the Texas Panhandle, the Oklahoma Panhandle, and western Kansas, water levels have dropped between 150 and 250 feet from their pre-pumping baselines. Not gradually, not temporarily, permanently. The water that once sat 50 feet below a farmer's field now sits 200 feet down, or 250, or it is simply gone. In the southern Texas Panhandle alone, approximately 69% of the original saturated thickness of the aquifer has already been pumped out and removed. More than 2/3. Gone in less than a human lifetime. The total volume already extracted across all 8 states sits somewhere between 240 and 270 million acre-feet of water. To put that in perspective, the United States Geological Survey estimates it took just 75 years to permanently drain a quarter of what took 6 million years to form. 9% of the aquifer's entire original volume has already been removed and will not return under any circumstances or any timeline that means anything to a living person. The wells tell the same story in numbers that are impossible to dismiss. A typical Texas Panhandle irrigation well drilled in 1960 produced between 400 and 800 gallons per minute. The same well measured in 2020 produces between 50 and 150 gallons per minute. Some produce less. Some produce nothing at all. The Texas Water Development Board's groundwater management reports count approximately 20,000 wells across the southern aquifer that have already gone permanently dry. 20,000 wells, each one representing a farm, a family, a decision about what comes next. The Texas Water Development Board projects that at current depletion rates, an additional 20 to 30% of the remaining accessible water will be gone within the next 30 years, not the distant future, within the working lifetime of a farmer who is standing in his field right now. And here is the number that sits beneath all the others. The aquifer's recharge rate across most of its southern extent averages approximately 0.24 inches per year, about 6 millimeters. The water being pumped out at industrial volumes is between 10,000 and 2 million years old. The aquifer is being drained 30 to 100 times faster than it is being replenished. This is not a drought. Droughts end. This is a one-way withdrawal from a non-renewable resource, and the ledger has been running in the red for decades. The numbers are staggering, but numbers do not plant fields. Numbers do not run cattle. Numbers do not send children to school in towns built on the assumption that the water beneath them would last forever. People do. And across the high plains right now, specific people in specific towns are watching that assumption collapse in real time. Dalhart, Texas, Plainview, Texas, Hereford, Texas, Garden City, Kansas, Liberal, Kansas, Guymon, Oklahoma. These are not abstract data points on a government map. These are working agricultural communities of 5,000 to 20,000 residents, towns with grain elevators and feed stores and high school football teams and churches that have been full on Sunday mornings for 100 years. Each one sitting directly above some of the most depleted sections of the Ogallala. Each one watching specific wells drilled by specific families in the 1950s and 1960s go quiet year by year. The well-by-well story is the part that almost never reaches a national audience. 4-generation farming families are abandoning fields their great-grandparents broke from native grass. Center pivot systems that once covered entire sections of land are being shut down and left to rust. Irrigated cotton, corn, and sorghum fields are being converted back to dryland farming. Land values in the most affected counties have dropped between 30 and 50% in a single decade. Population has been falling steadily in Sherman, Hansford, Hartley, and Dumas counties since the 2020 census. The agricultural economy that sustained these communities for 70 years is contracting, and the water driving that contraction is not coming back. Then there is Happy, Texas. Population 578. In 2023, Happy became one of the first municipalities in the United States to officially notify its residents that its sole water source was projected to fail within the foreseeable future. The town's 2 municipal wells, drilled in the 1960s into a section of the Ogallala that the Texas Water Development Board now classifies as functionally depleted, are running out. A town called Happy is facing the loss of its water supply with no clear solution and no federal funding to find one. Booker, Texas, has begun planning a regional water pipeline to import water from less depleted aquifers further north. The estimated construction cost is approximately $200 million for a town of 1,500 people. The Federal Bureau of Reclamation has indicated it cannot fund the project under current authority. Texas A&M AgriLife Extension estimates that approximately 17% of the 3,000 to 6,000 communities depending on the aquifer will face significant water supply challenges within 20 years. The people living above the Ogallala are not in denial. They are in transition. The question is whether anyone in Washington is paying attention. The data has been public for nearly 50 years. The depletion has been measurable, documented, and undeniable since the 1970s. Every credible federal and state agency tracking the Ogallala has been watching the same numbers move in the same direction for decades. So the reasonable question is simple. What did the government actually do about it? The answer is complicated. And for the communities watching their wells go dry, it is not a comfortable one. Texas established the High Plains Underground Water Conservation District No. 1 in 1951, making it one of the earliest groundwater management institutions in the country. 7 additional groundwater conservation districts followed across the Texas Panhandle by 1990. Kansas created 6 groundwater management districts beginning in 1972. The Texas legislature passed Senate Bill 1 in 1997, requiring regional water planning across 16 Texas regions, with the High Plains designated as priority areas. The United States Geological Survey began publishing its annual High Plains Aquifer water level reports in 1978, creating one of the most detailed, long-term groundwater monitoring records in the world. These institutions are real. The people working inside them are serious and qualified. The reports they produce are thorough and accurate. But here is the critical detail that explains everything. None of these institutions have the legal authority to stop pumping. They monitor it. They report it. They negotiate voluntary reductions with farmers who are themselves trying to survive economically. And while those negotiations happen, the Ogallala continues to drop. The most ambitious federal response came in 2011, when the Natural Resources Conservation Service launched the Ogallala Aquifer Initiative, distributing approximately $73 million annually in conservation incentive funding across the 8 aquifer states. By 2023, the program had successfully enrolled approximately 500,000 irrigated acres in voluntary conservation practices. That sounds significant until you consider the full picture. The aquifer underlies approximately 25 million irrigated acres in total. The conservation program is covering roughly 2% of the affected agricultural footprint, while depletion continues unchecked across the remaining 98%. The managed recharge programs tell a similar story. Kansas's Equisbeds Aquifer Storage and Recovery Program near Wichita has injected approximately 100,000 acre-feet of treated water back into the ground since the program began. The total depletion across all 8 states is between 240 and 270 million acre-feet. The recharge program is replacing less than 0.04% of what has already been removed. The monitoring continues. The reports keep coming. The voluntary programs enroll their 2%. And somewhere beneath the High Plains, the water level drops another fraction of an inch. The institutions built to manage this crisis were never given the tools to stop it, and the Ogallala does not wait for policy to catch up. There is a question that sits underneath everything else in this story. A question that farmers ask, that water managers ask, that the small towns watching their wells go quiet ask quietly, hoping the answer is different from what the science says. Can the water come back? Can we refill it? Can we fix this? The answer, according to every hydrogeologist who has studied the Ogallala's geology in detail, is no. Not on any timeline that matters to a living person. Not on any timeline that matters to their children. Not on any timeline that matters to their grandchildren's grandchildren. Here is why. The Ogallala is what hydrogeologists call a confined aquifer. It is sealed above by layers of caliche, a hard, cement-like calcium carbonate crust that forms naturally across the High Plains surface. Below it sits impermeable bedrock. Surface rainfall does not percolate down into the formation efficiently. The water already sitting in the aquifer was not deposited recently. It was deposited during the late Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs, geological periods when the climate of the High Plains was dramatically wetter than it is today, and when surrounding glacial systems delivered orders of magnitude more recharge into the formation than current conditions could ever provide. The current recharge rate, measured by USGS hydrogeologists across the southern aquifer, averages approximately 0.24 inches per year, about 6 millimeters. The pumping rate during active irrigation season averages between 8 and 24 inches per year, depending on the region. The aquifer is being drained 30 to 100 times faster than any natural process can replace it. That mismatch is not subtle. It is not a rounding error. It is the entire story. The only place along the Ogallala's vast extent where meaningful natural recharge actually occurs is the Nebraska Sandhills, a geological region of porous, wind-deposited sand that allows precipitation to filter downward efficiently. The Nebraska Sandhills are among the most water-rich areas in the United States precisely because of this geology. The southern Ogallala, the Texas Panhandle, western Kansas, the Oklahoma Panhandle, has almost no functional equivalent, almost no natural mechanism to replace what is being removed. If pumping stopped today across the entire southern aquifer, the Texas Panhandle portion of the formation would take an estimated 6,000 to 10,000 years to return to its 1950 water levels. 6,000 years. This is not an issue that a new federal program can correct. This is not something that a better-funded conservation initiative can reverse. The water that took 6 million years to accumulate is leaving in a matter of decades, and the geology does not negotiate. The Ogallala Aquifer supplies water for approximately 30% of all irrigated farmland in the United States. 1 in 3 irrigated acres in this country drinks from the same underground reservoir that is being permanently drawn down right now. That is not a regional statistic. That is a national food supply statistic. And most Americans have never heard of the aquifer it depends on. The High Plains region fed by the Ogallala produces a disproportionate share of everything that ends up in an American grocery store. Beef, corn, wheat, sorghum, cotton. These are not specialty crops grown for niche markets. These are the foundational commodities that underpin American agriculture and global food prices simultaneously. When the water that grows them begins to disappear permanently, the consequences do not stay on the high plains. They move outward through supply chains, through commodity markets, through the price of a pound of ground beef at a grocery store in Cincinnati or Charlotte or Seattle. The land value collapse already underway in the most affected counties is not a future warning. It is present tense. Agricultural land values in Sherman, Hansford, and Dumas counties in Texas have dropped between 30 and 50% in a single decade. That is not a market correction. That is a permanent revaluation of land whose productive capacity is being eliminated by the disappearance of its water source. The farms are not failing because of bad management or poor decisions. They are failing because the resource underneath them is gone. The comparison to the Dust Bowl is not rhetorical, and it is not accidental. In the 1930s, the High Plains lost its topsoil. The soil eventually came back, slowly, with intervention and changed farming practices. The Ogallala will not come back. The question hovering over every Panhandle ranch and every Kansas wheat farm is whether the coming agricultural contraction will be managed in orderly, a slow transition to dryland farming and reduced output, or whether it will accelerate into something that resembles what happened in 1933. Communities emptying, economies collapsing, generations of accumulated agricultural knowledge and infrastructure walking away from land that can no longer support them. The international dimension makes the stakes larger still. The High Plains does not just feed America. It feeds export markets across the developing world. Countries that depend on American grain imports will feel the depletion of an aquifer they have never heard of, in a region they could not find on a map. The aquifer took the geological age of mammals to fill. It will be largely empty across vast portions of its southern extent within the lifetimes of children alive today. The breadbasket is not a permanent feature of the American landscape. It was always borrowed time, and the clock is almost out. The people closest to this crisis are not waiting for permission to understand it. The farmers watching their wells go quiet, the water managers counting the dry ones, the families in Happy, Texas, and Booker, Texas making impossible calculations about an impossible future. They see it clearly. They have seen it for years. They are making hard choices in real time with the information they have and the options that remain. The broader failure is one of visibility. The Ogallala has no shoreline retreating, no bathtub ring, no boat docks stranded on dry sand. It is invisible infrastructure, dropping 1 foot at a time beneath fields that still look green from the road. But somewhere beneath the high plains, in formations that took 6 million years to fill, the clock is still running. And the question America has not yet answered is whether it will act before the wells go silent, or after.